During the purchase, we did a lot of history, particularly with Bruce's parents, coming down and helping us with the remodeling and things that we'd like to do on the property. Because there's a business right behind it, we had a great deal of work to do. From what we've been told and from the history that we've had about the property, we've sort of been introduced to a lot of information over the course of a short period of time, and we've gathered quite a bit of information as well. I'm going to pass around a very delicate news clipping that came out of a paper in 1979, which depicts one of the Switzer children being pulled by a horse on a sleigh in front of the property, along with a few other children of the neighborhood. This was something that we recovered during our history and our research through Bruce's parents. As I go through a lot of the information with the property itself, I'm going to sort of give a history from the time the property was built forward, so that you have an idea of who actually have lived in the home since its construction in 1885. Captain Clay Switzer was actually born, let me get my notes here, in February 8th of 1854, and he was born in Newport, Kentucky. He passed away November 10th of 1926. The house was constructed in 1885, with he and his wife being the primary or the only owners at that time. His wife was Amelia Bettinger. Upon marriage, obviously, Amelia Switzer. She was born September of 13 of 1856 in Cincinnati, Ohio. She died here in Tell City in July 31st, 1934. Mr. Switzer died a few years prior to her, November 10, 1926, here in Tell City.
They are buried in, they're buried in St. Mary's Cemetery.
Correct.
Yeah.
They, along with most of their children, are buried in St. Mary's. So there's a little bit of historical reference to the burial site. According to what we've been told, Mr. Switzer had one of the most elaborate funerals here in Tell City, obviously being a very influent member of the community at that time. He was known to be a wharf master, an industrialist, and also a huge entrepreneur in Tell City. They did have 5 children. Their firstborn was Rose Seville Brenner of Detroit, Michigan. She married a Brenner. Obviously, her maiden name was Switzer. She was born April 20th of 1889. So not too long after the actual house was built, she was born as the first child of the Switzer family. She died April 30th of 1981. They also had another daughter, Corinna Elizabeth Switzer. She was born 1885. March the 2nd, died 1962, August the 11th, at 76 years old. They had 3 sons, Stanley G., Charles O., and Albert F. Albert F. is the person that you'll see depicted in the article that I'm actually passing around. He was born February 5th, 1900, died here in Tell City October 7th, 1978. The Stanley and Charles Switzer were born in Tell City. However, they lived primarily in Lewisport, Kentucky, farming much of the property that the Switzer family had actually owned. So a lot of their heritage and history is in Lewisport, Kentucky. In addition, after the death of Clay and Amelia Switzer, the house basically passed to 2 of the children. One of them being Rose Brenner of Detroit, the other being Corinna Elizabeth. Corinna Elizabeth did not marry. She actually lived in the house until her death. She was the musician of the family. It's been told to us that she performed concerts throughout Tell City, primarily in what is now the auction house, which was the original opera house of Tell City. She did hold music lessons and piano lessons in the property. Her mother and father both died at the home, as well as herself. So there have been 2 generations that we know of that have passed away in the actual house. Of all the properties that we've gone over and all the information that we've gone over, I have a great deal of information concerning the obituaries of a lot of the children and family members. Captain Switzer, being a very predominant family in here in Tell City, it's stating to us that Captain Clay Switzer passed away at his home on South Main Street about 8:45 Wednesday morning after having been failing in health after the past several months. Captain Switzer was predominantly connected with his early industrial life of our city, and for a long time was considered one of the wealthiest men in the county. He was unable to procure sufficient data to write his life history for publication this week, and at the request of the family are letting the same go over until the next week. The funeral was held Saturday morning at 8 o'clock from St. Paul's Catholic Church, with interment at St. Mary's Cemetery. This goes on for several pages, which again I will pass around. This was from the Tell City News, Friday, November 12th, 1926. It follows his obituary with something that I am actually going to read, because it's rather unique that several of the members of the family's obituaries followed by a poem of some sort. This is what followed Captain Switzer's funeral processional in the paper itself. The title is Crossing the Bar. Sunset and evening star, and one clear call for me. And may there be no morning of the bar where I put out to sea, but such tide as moving seems asleep, too full for sound and foam, when that which drew from out the boundless deep turns a high home. Twilight and evening bell, and after the dark, and may there be no sadness of farewell, I will embark. For thy love from our homes of time and place, the flood may hear me far. I hope to see my pilot face to face when I have crossed the bar. That was actually quoted by Alfred Lord Tennyson, and it was the ending poem of actually Clay Switzer's funeral. Being a wharf master, this sort of puts everything in perspective and summarizes a great deal of his life. A lot of the history that we see, his in particular obituaries span quite a few newspapers throughout the county based on his popularity and status in the county. I'm going to pass this around as well so that you guys can have a sort of an overview of that. His wife Amelia also passed away Tuesday morning, July 31st of, it looks like 1934. She actually passed away in the property as well. It's stated that last week's extreme heat proved too much for the respected Telsidian. So in obviously 1934, they must have had a really wicked summer, and it may have contributed to her death after a long illness. So again, I'm going to pass this around. This tells a little bit about her obituary as well as her life in general. I do have several obituaries that were recovered out of several papers throughout time. Rose Brenner, obviously being one of the Switzer family's children, she passed away April 30th on a Thursday at 92 years old at the Lincoln Hills nursing home here in Tell City. That was in 1981. So obviously her long life contributed a lot to her contribution to Tell City. Charles and Stanley, and I'll pass this around as well, her sister, Corinna Switzer, was rather unique in her death, even in her life. She was the musician of the family. She was the one that performed the concerts in the house as well as shortly down the street. It's rumored, and this was 1938 was the date of this article, that Tell City mourned her loss on August the 11th. She was admitted to St. Mary's Hospital in Evansville, Indiana, due to a lacerated thumb. Now, I don't know if that lacerated thumb had anything to do with her piano playing, which she was very well known for, but it's sincerely possible. Again, her obituary states a great deal of her history and her correlation and relationship to Tell City. So I'm also going to pass that around. Consequently to Clay Switzer, his son Stanley's obituary is rather short. I don't know if that contributed to his existence as well. He actually was a predominantly Hancock County farmer. The services were held, I believe, in Hancock County as well, or actually in Lewisport, Kentucky, at 9 a.m. on Monday at the Immaculate Conception Church in Hawesville. It states that he was interred at St. Mary's Cemetery next to his family members. His death, unfortunately, was very sudden. He passed away at the young age of 66. It's telling us that he went out and milked and fed the property's livestock that morning, Friday morning. He remarked to Mrs. Switzer, his wife, that he didn't feel well and complained of pains in his chest. Mrs. Switzer called the family doctor and advised that the patient be brought to his office in an ambulance. Unfortunately, Mr. Switzer was stricken as he arose from the couch on which he was laying and died at 6:30 a.m. before the ambulance could actually be called. Obviously, with the obituary stating that, it's possible that he may have died of a heart attack. Being a rural farmer at 66 years old, I'm sure most of the responsibilities of that farm lay in his hands, so that may again have contributed to his death. His wife was Frances A. Switzer. She died at 4:20 p.m. on Wednesday, oddly enough again at Lincoln Hills nursing home here in Tell City. She was born February 28, 1894, and she was the daughter of George and Guinevere Allen Schlatz. That's the correlation with the Schlatz family with the Switzer lineage. They also had a son who died in 1934. He actually was also named Clay, I'm assuming after his grandfather. So again, I'll pass this around as well. There are several descendants of the Switzer children, Miss Anna Switzer as well as Miss Kate Switzer. I have no information at all on their relationship to the Switzer family. All I know is that they are very similar in age to a lot of the Switzer clan as well. I'm going to go on the assumption that those were the children of the Switzer family. So these would be the grandchildren of the Switzer family. And again, I'll pass that information around as well. I'm going to read a letter to you that was actually given to us. It's a little bit odd because I'm not too sure where the lineage actually started and how this letter came to be. This was a lot of research. When Bruce and I took over the property in 2009, we took over in June 2009. It wasn't too far after our ownership of the property that we had a large table that came into the restaurant. Bruce and I did not know any of the members of this family. There were about 8 or 10 of them. They came in and sat down. We didn't really know a whole lot about them. One of the members of the family called me over to the table. I was standing behind the counter, and she was an elderly woman. I would guesstimate in her late 80s, early 90s. Obviously the matriarch of the family. I knelt down at the table and she looked at me and said, "I remember very fondly playing in this room when I was a child." Obviously that struck a very big chord with me, wanting to know a little bit more about her history. I knelt down and she then told me that her grandmother and grandfather were Clay and Amelia Switzer. So at that point, she had my undivided attention. I asked her a lot of information in a very short amount of time. I didn't want to overwhelm her with my questions, obviously, but I did want to know a lot more about her history. She looked over my shoulder and kept staring at something above our cash register in the restaurant. I don't know if any of you, most of you in this room have been in that building at one point or another. What she was staring at was this lantern. And she looked at me and she said, "That's the lantern that my grandmother used to help my grandfather up and down the river. And I looked at her and I said, can you be sure of that? And I took the lantern down from the register and brought it over to the table, and she held it up and turned it around and looked, and she said, oh yes. She said, I could never forget that lantern. That was an icon, relic in our family. And to know that that is still hanging somewhere on this property, she said it warmed her soul. And I'll never forget that comment as long as I live. So just speaking to her for the short time that we did, she also gave us some information about her family, which had then moved, I believe, to Ohio or possibly even the Detroit area. She told us that one of her nephews, who lives in Texas, was trying to put together information on the Switzer family and starting something in the way of a book. Now, whether or not that's come to be, I do not know. But we do have her information. I'm hoping to get back in contact with her to find out if that actually came to be. The lantern itself, because of the time frame in which Captain Switzer was a wharf master, obviously lighting along the river was very scarce. It had to be man-made, and of course it had to be done in correlation to their particular pier. He was issued the red globe on purpose. That was his color along the river. That signified his dock. So when the expected captain was expected to come down the river, the wife of that captain would go up to the crow's nest, in which our house actually has 3 levels. The main floor, there's a second floor, and then there's a third floor, in addition to a basement. The third floor is basically attic space with another stairwell going almost vertically up into a cutout in the ceiling. That cutout leads to what's called a crow's nest on top of the property, surrounded by wrought iron fence. It's probably an area that's probably half the size of this table. It's told to us that she would actually hang the lantern from that crow's nest so that Captain Switzer would know along the river where he needed to turn the barge to turn into his dock. So having this particular piece of memorabilia in the property is just extremely historic. And to have her confirm that this is the actual lantern from her own recollection is even more historic. You can actually read in Amelia Switzer's obituary a little bit of information concerning her using the lantern to guide her husband up and down the river. So it's really a neat situation. I'm going to go ahead and read this letter to you, which is, again, something that was given to us during the process of uncovering all of this information from Bruce's parents. It says, about the Switzer house history. I don't know much about the house history itself. It was built in 1885 by Clay and Amelia, and he was then a wharf boat captain. His wharf apparently was just below the house. Again, because the river has changed its course many times over that period, a lot of the histories of Tell City streets have now been sort of given up to the river. The Carriage Inn was built. The Carriage Inn was built and kept where Clay Switzer and Amelia kept the horses and buggies in the restaurant or in the property. The Switzers owned it until probably the mid-90s, when Corinna and Molly had died. In the front room is where Corinna, who was the opera singer, gave concerts throughout the Midwest and practiced her singing and taught piano lessons. Other than that, if you have any specific questions about the house or the Switzer family, let me know and I may be able to answer. The response to this was, Kenny, I don't remember any talk of the Switzer house when I was growing up, other than it was where our granddaddy was raised. I have only been in the house once, and that was when it was with Mo and Ann. I'm only assuming it had something to do with Corinna and Molly, Mo and Ann, I don't know. I remember Mr. Zabel, obviously Darrell Zabel, owning the property, telling us about the back houses that had double front doors, so that when the ladies, or the front of the house rather, so that the double doors were put in so that the ladies that came in big hoop skirts could actually walk in through the front door without messing up their dresses. Now again, that's unconfirmed, that's just via email. Mr. Zabel also told us about the hole in the roof, access to the very tip-top floor. A person could raise the flap and see whether they were what was going on going up and down the river. When the woman of the house saw her husband's boat coming down the river, She'd know whether it was time to put on the cornbread or send her lover home as need be. I called Aunt Martha to ask if she remembered anything else. She said she didn't remember anything other than that she lived in the house with her grandparents when she first got out of high school and worked at GE. She said Great Aunt Rose Brenner, née Switzer, again Great Rose Switzer, lived there until the time, also until that time of her death, and was recollected as being a mean old lady. So I guess Aunt Martha does not have very many fond memories of the house. Martha said she had an 8x10 picture of the house that is kind of faded, but she took it for it to see if there were any dates that were marked on it. I think the Zabels also told us that the clay roof on the house is the original roof. The clay roof is actually slate, not clay. And I believe, according to our recollection, it is the original house, or the original roof for the house. And that's pretty much all we've been told about the property. Now, according to the history of the property, there haven't been very many families that have actually lived in the property since the Switzer family left the property. According to us, the former owner of the property after 1958, which is the last recorded Switzer descendant living in the property, was a Mr. Paul Rule. They then lived in the home, selling it to Bob and Lucy Clark. Now, our recollection of the Clark family, we've been told, was that they turned the Carriage Inn property, which is where the restaurant currently is, into sort of an antique store. A lot of the items that you see hanging in that property were the result of that antique store. When the Zabels purchased it in 1979, construction was done on the property and it was then transformed into what you now know as Carriage Inn. So as of right now, we have about 5 families living in the property other than the descendants originally from the Switzer family since 1885 when the property was actually built. I'm going to mention this on a side note, hesitantly. Incidentally, I am going to pass around a marriage record. This was actually given to us from Perry County, Indiana. These are the records from 1850 to 1920. I guess this was done alphabetically, and it does show 3 of the descendants of the Switzer family, including Clay and Amelia's actual marriage record. So this gives you kind of an idea of the start of the family. We have been told that the house was actually haunted. Now, as a historical side note, we have no proof of this, obviously. Upon our interest in the property in 2009, prior to our ownership, we actually were in the property doing some cleaning and so on and so forth, and someone came up to us on horseback. She was telling us that she actually had done some landscaping and yard work for the owner of the property prior to our taking over. She worked for a local landscaper. She then told us that a spirit dwelled in the property even today. She described what the spirit was actually wearing, which I thought was rather unique. She was in a very tight black skirt and white blouse, and she lived primarily on the second floor of the property, indicating 2 windows facing the home on the second floor that she could actually see. It was told to us that her name was, we've sort of deduced, was Aunt Rose. After reading some of the articles that I've read concerning the history on the property, I'm kind of more inclined to say that it might be Corinna. Corinna is the one who was declared a mean old lady, according to some of the articles that you're being passed around to see. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. We haven't had too many issues that we couldn't explain in the property, but there have been a few. Now, whether these are related to this, I have no idea. I'm not a big believer in that, but some of these issues just have come up that have sort of made me question that belief. The property, when we first took over, upon leaving the property, Bruce and I were told by Larry Hagedorn and Sonia Hagedorn, who were the previous owners, that all the windows needed to be closed just to keep the sunlight out and keep the cool air in. And we obeyed by that very strictly because, we just wanted to make sure everything was correct. Now, exiting that particular property, we made sure that all of the shutters were closed. As we left, I believe Bruce was behind me in another vehicle. I was in front of him, and I slammed on my brakes. When I looked up at the side of the property, this is the alley side of the property, not the parking lot Carriage inside. And I looked up at the second floor and noticed that one of the slats in the shutters was wide open. Now, I'm a pretty thorough person. I go back and triple check things when I need to. I'm 100% sure that that was closed. Not too long after we took over the property as well, we were told that through a Christmas tree that was put up in the front room of the property that fell 3 times. Now, the first fall we contributed to our poor construction of that Christmas tree and its base in particular. The second time it fell, we decided to anchor the Christmas tree to the wall using thread and wire, and actually wire it to the door or to the window frame. When it fell the third time, I was a little more concerned. Oddly enough, we didn't really tell a whole lot of people other than the occasional friend that would come into the restaurant. We didn't really think anything of it. The young lady that actually approached us before owning the property that told us about the spirit and her existence on the second floor came in and looked at us and said, "You've had some trouble in the house." Now that sent a little bit of a chill up my spine. She said, "She doesn't like your tree." And at that point, it got our attention. Her favorite color was blue, is what she told us. Now our tree there was nothing blue on it. It was mint green and chocolate brown. So, I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I did hide an ornament, a blue one, in that tree. As soon as she told us this, the tree did not move for the rest of the holiday season. I think Bruce, the following year, decided he wanted to taunt the ghost.
I can't imagine him doing it.
Same tree was put up in the same exact spot, same ornaments, same everything. We didn't change or alter it one bit. After we actually put the tree up, I think he stood in the living room and looked up at the ceiling and said, "I dare you to knock it down this year." And I'm thinking, oh my Lord. Why would you taunt her? So without his knowledge, I did find another blue ornament, and I tucked it very secretively up at the top of the tree, apologizing profusely to whatever entity may be in there. Needless to say, the tree did not move that year either. So there have been a few things that have occurred in the home that I can't confirm or deny. We've had another issue with our plantation shutters being opened after we've closed them multiple times, this time on the opposite side of the home, facing the Carriage and parking lot. Now, we dismissed again that issue being just a fluke. They were closed 3 times. The last time they were closed with a latch, which sealed the shutter. I don't honestly know how it was opened again. But it wasn't too long after we sealed them with the latch that it was actually opened again. So, whether that be true or not, we have yet to figure out. The property itself is an amazing home. You can see the craftsmanship just walking through it. Knowing that it's 120 plus years old makes it even more of a gem to be able to live in. And with that, that's the information that we've been given. Thank you so much for inviting us to come out and give us this allow us to give you this presentation. We hope it's been informative, and any information you need further, just let us know.
Thank you. Questions?
I have a question. Were there any buildings between the Carriage House and the river?
She was an average.
You know, it's been told to us, and again, this
She
is
pricked her finger
through,
on thorn.
you know, information that we've been given. The Bedding or Chip Company was actually formed, its original building in our parking lot. The building is no longer there. Behind that building was, we were told was a barn, which housed most of the horses that were for the
It's behind the
drawn
carriage.
carriages. It was actually to the side of the Carriage Inn property that you see now, in the parking area. Prior to, behind that particular property, all we were told was that the wharf at some point had come not too far up to the property. I don't know its actual distance from the house, but that's what we were told.
I was always wondering too, if they were like a mini warehouse or something. When they
Well, we
framed
were
their
told
goods
that-
off, they put them
Yeah.
in the building.
And we were told that a lot of the carriages were housed in the original Carriage House, which is our restaurant. I can't see a lot of those carriages being housed there. It's not a very big building at all. And I've seen some of the wharfs that have come up and down the river, as you can see with some of the pictures, historic photos that you see. These barges were loaded with what looks to me like over 100 carriages at one point. I can't see all of those being stored in that building. It's not big enough to have that storage area. As you come into the restaurant, you will see the front portion of the property actually has been added on to the original building. The original building is still intact, it's still the original 4 walls, but there's been a garage added at one end, and the front property was added to expand the restaurant, where the restaurant is now. As you walk into the front door, you will see an arch above the main aisleway when you walk up to the counter itself. That is the original front of the building. Now, directly behind that arch, from a building standpoint, it's actually planned this way. There is an identical arch which is now sealed off. You can't see this. If you go to the back of the building, you will actually see the outline of that arch that's been bricked over. And there is actually a depiction of a carriage that was drawn in. So that kind of gives you the historical reference that it was a 2-door, so that the carriages could be pulled in and straight through, and then exited out through the alley area,
So we don't really
possibly
have
down to the river.
pictures or photographs of that carriage in back of there at all. But I do know there was another carriage house on the other side of Maine, over where Fisher's was.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know a lot of the houses
Yeah,
built back then
yeah.
contained carriage houses behind them for that very reason. So, we've had a lot of fun in uncovering these little tidbits and pieces of the property, so it's been rather interesting.
How many rooms are in the house?
The rooms, we've been told, have sort of shifted and changed over the course of time. When you walk in the front of the home, the parlor is the first room that you'll encounter. It is to the left of the stairwell. We've been told that's the room that a lot of the concerts that Corinna had actually put on took place in that room. And actually, Bruce has a piano that is up against the wall of the stairwell that goes up, which there's some sort of we believe some sort of a bracket was actually anchored along that stairwell, possibly to light the music where she actually played. To the right of that stairwell actually is 2 rooms. The front room is more of a parlor area. The room behind it is now a dining room where there's a brick fireplace that was put in. I believe that was put in at a later date. I don't believe that's the original fireplace, obviously, for the property. Behind it is the kitchen. Beside the kitchen is now a breakfast area with a bathroom. Upstairs, oddly enough, the property itself only has 2 bedrooms currently. Now, as you walk up the staircase and turn to your left, you're going to come up on a landing. The landing actually now has a door that goes out to an outer porch, which actually you can look out over the river. We think at one point that could possibly have been a bedroom. It's certainly large enough to be a bedroom. If you turn to the right, or to the left rather, and go through the hall, you'll see the master bedroom, which faces Main Street. And that's part of the 3 windows that you'll see as you look at the front of the home. If you go down the hallway to the right again, you'll see the second bedroom. And then as you go back to the very back, you'll see what is now a bathroom, which we have believed that is just massively huge for a bathroom. We think that may have been a servant's entrance and possibly a servant's quarters at that point. Based on its size, it could have held a number of different servants. The back stairwell does go straight down into the kitchen. It's very steep, very narrow, and rather treacherous. So we're assuming that that may have been the actual servant's entrance into the downstairs part of the house. As you come into the upper staircase and turn into the front parlor room upstairs, you'll also see another staircase that goes straight up. That is the one that goes up into the upper attic. Whether that was used for storage or possibly a room of some sort back then is a possibility. In the center of that room, you'll see a staircase that almost goes vertical straight up to the crow's nest. And then there's also a back stairwell that goes down into the basement, which is the full length of the house. So it looks rather large on the outside, but when you actually get in and look at the rooms are so large themselves that it's not quite as big as you would think on the inside.
Is any of it still the same as it was?
I think the rooms have been maintained and intact. I don't know with their use. Back in 1885, they could have been transformed. We were told that the front parlor at one point had oak doors and oak paneling that actually closed off that room. That was primarily where we're thought to believe that that's where the gentleman would retire and smoke cigars, maybe drink brandy. But that was pretty much primarily the men's room to go into. That was told to us by several people that had claimed to live in the property. And it's been changed since. And you can see actually when you walk into that room, there are what looks to me like where runners would be. There's actually a portico that's been cut out of the ceiling and dropped down. And it could be where a track was laid, where these oak doors could have slid back on each other and possibly closed off that room at some point.
Do you plan to restore any of it?
We're in the process of kind of modifying the house. The house was updated by the Zabels when they owned the property. I would love to keep the property as original as possible. The unfortunate thing is we don't have any internal pictures of what the property looked like back in 1885. So it's very difficult piecing together what we think the property may be. I would love nothing more than to get it back to its original status. But unfortunately, without the information, there's just really, it's primarily guesswork. But I would love to see that originally restored back to its original. It would be great. I'm going to pass this around too, and you can tell this was actually built or manufactured by a company in Louisville, Kentucky.
I did want to say one thing about your narrow staircase in the back.
Mhm.
We went up to the Emmett Plantation just across the river down by Lewisport. It's maybe even older than the Switzer house. They have a very narrow, steep staircase that goes from the kitchen down to the basement and up to the next, and they said that was the service.
Yeah, and primarily the servants' entrances were in the back of most homes. We were also told that the property has a sister property. Now, we don't have any historical reference to whether or not that's actually true. However, the next time you have a trip planned for Evansville and you go down 66, as you go through Grandview, your first turn will take you down the main strip of Grandview. Before you get to the second turn, right after the post office on the right-hand side, you will see a big brick home.
I've been in that home.
If you look at that house straight on, it is almost identical to the property here in Tell City. Now, we don't know if there's a historical reference to the two properties, whether the same architect could possibly have constructed each one, but its similarity is outstanding. So we're under the assumption that it's possible that it could be a sister property to the Switzer house.
Have you ever been in there?
Never been in.
Which one?
It's as you enter Grandview,
Yeah.
the second turn you get before you turn out of Grandview, right beside the post office, there's a small
Straight
alley
from the post office?
right off the main road. And
Okay.
it's between the post office is here, the alley is here, the main road is here. As you curve around, right beside that alley, there's a brick home.
My uncle's grandmother lived there.
Okay, that's what we believe might be the sister property to the Switzer house.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've been in that house.
From an identical standpoint, if you look at the house dead on, it is identical to the Switzer house. So it's a really interesting correlation to the architecture of that time.
Does anybody here know the connection between that and Switzer Hill on the north side of town? Is that part of the?
I have no idea if there's a connection to the Switzer Hill at all. I'm not too sure. Bruce, do you know any?
Where's Switzer Hill?
Well, if you leave Tell City going north toward Troy, it's always Switzer Hill there on the right.
Is there a home now on top of that hill?
The Mooniers live up.
Art Lunar, yeah.
Okay, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Switzer Hill.
I know that Clay and Amelia owned a great deal of property in Tell City,
If you look
as
at-
well as Kentucky. They had a lot of farmland in Kentucky.
If you look in the Schreiber notes we have here, the Switzers own ground across the river directly from that. And believe it or not, Lewisport, between Lewisport and Hallsville area was called West Tell City.
Really?
Yes.
Now that I
that's
didn't
West
know.
Tell City. Is that right, Doc?
I've seen that on maps.
Yeah, it is. It's West Tell City. In fact, in some of the newspaper articles you read at that time, it's called Tell City, Kentucky.
I'll be darned.
And it really PO'd people in that area. But the old woman, that Switzer area, they had a farm across the river from there. And Schreiber talks about the old woman would walk down from that area, tell you how quiet things were then. Now, there was no sound. And the old man would roll across the river and plow the fields over there in Kentucky, where the fire plants are now. And she would holler across the river that supper was ready.
The river wasn't near as wide.
Well, the river was a lot smaller back
But
then.
it was a lot quieter then.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it
That's
was no
really-
problem for him to hook mules up and whatever he did with mules and get in the boat, roll back across the river and eat. And that's
You know,
what
it's
Schreiber
entirely
did.
possible that they're descendants,
Oh,
because I
sure, that's part
know,
of the same family, yeah.
obviously with the Switzer family owning property in Kentucky and being a farmland in
That was West
particular, that was primarily farmed by Clay and Amelia's sons.
Right.
And so I think that there may be very direct correlation with that property across the river in Kentucky as well as the property here. So there may be a tie-in to that.
When I was in high school, there were two Switzer girls that came across and went to high school. And they were down, he took care of that light that is on that side of the river near Troy. It had to have oil in it, you know, to burn. And that was part of his job. And he had a motorboat. He had about the only motorboat that was in this area at that time.
I'll be darned.
Outboard motor. He didn't row.
Again, that probably could have been a descendant. I mean, obviously with the Switzer family being a wharf boat captain, he was known as Captain Switzer. That was his title even up until his death. So I think that there's a sincere correlation to anything pertaining to the river and pertaining to boating across the river from Kentucky.
Now, they farmed over there. I know that
Yeah,
it's a Switzer farm.
that's interesting. So it kind of just correlates and relates to the information that we've gathered too. It kind of pieces everything together in a general sort of way so that we have a general idea of what the descendants used to do after the Switzer family took over the property. So it's interesting.
One kind of strange question I have. Daryl Zabel told me that there was a cabinet in that house, corner cabinet, oak, made out of the train depot ticket windows or something with the wood from the.
That's entirely possible,
Did you ever know
Chris.
that
Actually,
story?
we were told there were two cabinets made.
There were.
Mr. Zabel actually took one of the cabinets with him. The second cabinet is still in the property. And when we took over, we were very intrigued about that cabinet because obviously it looked handmade. It did not look like it was assembled in a factory. So I've been asking Daryl about the cabinet. He told me that the cabinet he built himself. The wood itself, I don't know where it came from. So if that's what he was telling you, that it's entirely possible it was made from materials from the depot itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny about having that cabinet.
The cabinet itself is amazing.
Did you know that?
I didn't know you had
I
it.
had his twin. Sitting in my store right now on display. Not for
Really?
sale. But
We have the identical twin in the
Yeah.
house
I have
because
the
it's
twin.
in one corner of our parlor actually.
I'm debating on, I need to call Daryl and find out if the train depot story's true. If it is, I might donate it to the city for the new visitor center.
Yeah, you should find out if that's actually part of the visitor center or not because we have the twin cabinet for that
Yeah.
property.
Painted this ugly blue on the inside.
Yes, which we
Yeah,
created.
I didn't paint mine, but it was pretty darn ugly.
Unfortunately, we actually painted over the blue.
Yeah, I'd
It's
make
now
no
a
script.
black interior for us.
It probably looked a lot better, yeah.
We wanted it to be a little
God,
more.
I love blue.
You made her unhappy.
Yeah, you painted
We
it.
possibly did. Maybe why she knocked the tree down several times.
Yeah.
Daryl may have known something that we didn't know at that time, possibly.
But it's really, it's probably more, it's very ornate, the
It's
windows
an
in it.
extremely ornate cabinet, and I'm sure Daryl was a very talented woodworker. He did a lot of the work on the
It's
inside.
pretty heavy,
of
too.
those. So, oh yeah, it's definitely heavy.
Yeah,
So,
and large.
yeah.
Thanks again, Jay.
Well, thanks again for letting us share this information.
One at a time.
James, can I tell you, my dad used to have a horse, two-seater buggy, the small ones, he kept in the carriage house.
Did he really?
So I'm familiar with that.
I'll be darned. We've actually, Bruce and I have talked about trying to do some sort of a,
And he had a racehorse.
Buggy
He bought it
ride.
Off a racehorse, and he would drive to Louisville one day and come see a ball, then come back next. But he
I'll be
kept his
darned.
buggy.
That's a
They
really
weren't
neat
called
reference.
buggies then, they were called something else.
We've actually talked about trying to obtain some sort of a buggy similar to the period in which they had them at the property that we own now, the Switzer property, and possibly in doing buggy rides, maybe up to City Park and around the park and back to Carriage Inn.
Okay.
So,
You know, you guys are making a time capsule.
what's that?
Make a time capsule and put it in the house somewhere, right there. You know, you've got all this history.
Oh, absolutely.
It's gonna take you time to do it. I know you're all busy. You've got
We have
jobs.
to kind of sit down and
entrepreneur
actually
business.
spend time piecing everything
Yeah,
together.
but on the bottom of that lantern, I would take a Sharpie, a permanent marker. You're not gonna destroy the value of it because the value is worth more than the actual resale value of it to the
Yeah.
house. Write it on there somehow or put a tag on it. Because if something happened to both of you, other than the people in this room, are not gonna know
Oh,
that
I would
story.
love to actually put something in the globe, because we can actually take the globe out and look
Yeah,
at it.
and-
So I may actually take a piece of paper and seal it up somehow, maybe.
Do not
laminate
destroy,
it,
this came from,
and slide it into the globe.
You
so that
should,
anyone
somehow,
that-
write it on it, keep it in
Right.
it,
So that
hang a tag on it or something.
it stays within the.
I think that was originally a navigation line.
I agree, 100%.
It was-
We've been told that even from the
It was
descendants of the Switzer
Portside
family.
navigation lamp. He may have used it up at the house to mark, but that's what it was. It was a
Yeah.
navigation lamp.
And to have the granddaughter of the family confirm that was, because I took the lamp down and she looked at it and she said, this is
And
the
I saw it, I
lamp.
thought that, as soon as I saw it, that's what that is.
Yeah, it was the actual lamp, so it's really interesting to have that hanging and still be property. It's great.
Thank you guys, you both have Merry Christmas and we'll come back to the meeting.
Thank you so much for inviting us. I appreciate that.
Thank you for coming.
Joyce has margaritas out there. He didn't bring any margaritas tonight.
We'll let you figure it out.
Are we taking all that?
Yeah. I'm gonna check it out. Yeah.
Al remembers the house being built.
Thank you, Anita.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, thank you.
Go ahead.
You all gonna stay and eat anything?
Well, I'm gonna check with Bruce. I've got dinner on the stove.
Oh.
There you go.
Well, thank you.
There you go.
I'll let everybody get their goodies.
What's that?
I wish there was something more interesting.
James, I had to go to Cross Park.
I think they've recorded it, so you can.